You became what she wanted slowly, without even knowing it. You started as a man undomesticated, unknowable, alive, and you ended up a version of yourself that fit her comfort. You looked into her eyes and abandoned your own. There's a moment, invisible and silent, when a man disappears into someone else's expectations. No warning bell sounds. No alarm saves you. Just that subtle instant when you say yes while your soul screams no. When you soften a truth to keep her calm. When you withhold a boundary because you fear her departure. In that moment you betray the very essence of your being. Jean-Paul Sartre, writing in a Paris lit by war and rebellion, understood something that should have been handed to every man at birth. Hell is other people. Not because people are evil, but because in their gaze we lose ourselves. That is not love, that is what Sartre called bad faith. The moment when you stop being the author of your existence and become a character in someone else's novel. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Yet you handed over that making to her. You became for her instead of being for yourself. And here's the metaphysical truth that cuts deeper than any relationship advice. The man who lives for her dies by her indifference. You see, Sartre understood that consciousness is a void, a nothingness that has no essence until it chooses. The man who forgets this, who thinks a woman will complete him, define him, redeem him, hands over the steering wheel of his own soul. And she feels it whether she's 19 and ruled by instinct or 45 and emotionally intelligent. She knows when you've placed her on the throne of your identity. She knows when your need for her has become louder than your need to remain true to yourself. And that's when she pulls away. Not because she's cruel, not because she doesn't care, but because desire cannot survive in captivity. It needs space. It needs risk. It needs freedom, yours. The young man doesn't know this yet. He still thinks his love is currency that buys loyalty. He hasn't felt the humiliation of offering everything and watching her eyes wander, but he will. The older man knows too well. He sits in silence beside a woman who once wanted him before he turned himself into a predictable echo, before he stopped challenging her reality, before he stopped being other and became safe. She doesn't want safe, she wants sovereign. This is Sartre's shocking truth. The human heart longs for what it cannot possess. The man who doesn't need her, who can walk into her life and just as easily walk out, is the one who makes her confront her own abyss. That confrontation awakens her not always gently, but deeply. You've seen it. The man who says less, gives less, holds his shape when she storms. He doesn't bend. He doesn't beg. Somehow he's the one she cannot forget. Not because he played a game, but because he didn't break the rules of being. You want to be loved? That's human. But the moment you need to be loved, to be someone, you vanish. This isn't a trick or technique. This is existential integrity. The man who exists first defines himself, first chooses his values first, and lets love orbit him if it dares. If it doesn't, he remains whole. You've been told to open up, be vulnerable, express your needs, tell her how much she means to you. Yet the more you opened, the more she closed. The more you shared, the more she withdrew. You thought transparency would earn trust, but instead it diluted the mystery. You became readable, tame, harmless. Why? Because Sartre was right again. The human being is a project, not a product. You are not a fixed thing to be admired. You are an unfolding, a becoming. When you reduce yourself to your emotions, needs, and wounds, you confuse confession with presence. You turn your soul into a plea. You offer your depths before she's earned the map. She cannot help but recoil, not because she's heartless, but because the masculine in its highest form is not a boy begging to be understood. It is a force that exists with or without witness. Sartre calls this being for itself, the man who chooses, who defines himself, who stands in radical freedom, not recklessness, but freedom. The terrifying kind that says, I will not be a product of your need. I will not collapse into the man you want me to be. I am. You want to know why that older man at the bar, weathered, calm, disinterested, can walk into a room and hold her gaze longer than any gym-sculpted boy? It's because he's already paid the price of identity. He's already lost the woman who left when he stopped chasing. He's already made the mistake of bending until his spine snapped. He's already tried to buy love with consistency. Now he sits in silence, not as performance, but as monument to his own survival. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't overgive. That silence speaks louder than your cleverness ever will. Younger men mistake noise for power. Older men, if they've done the work, understand that the deepest gravity is wordless. She feels it. She doesn't know why. But in the presence of that man, the man with no compulsion to impress, no anxiety to win, she feels something ancient stir. Not safety, but danger. Not physical danger, but ontological danger. The danger of facing a man who cannot be owned, guilted, or reshaped by her insecurity. The danger of seeing someone already whole. Make no mistake, she will test that wholeness. She will provoke, withdraw, offer chaos, dressed as passion, just to see if you lose your footing. If you do, if you chase, explain, or perform, you collapse from man into mirror, from substance into shadow. But if you don't, if you remain unmoved, not because you're trying to win, but because you simply are, then she feels what Sartre called the anguish of freedom, your freedom. In that anguish, she will feel desire again, not because you manipulated her or played cold games, but because you reminded her of something every woman wants, but cannot say, that the masculine is not supposed to bend toward approval. It is supposed to be the mountain that remains unmoved. She doesn't want a man who needs her to breathe. She wants a man who breathes deeply in her absence. And if you become that man, not in theory or image, but in truth, she will feel your gravity. Whether she stays or not, whether she says it or not, she will remember you, because men like you are not common, and she knows it. Bad faith is the moment a free man lies to himself to avoid the discomfort of freedom. You convince yourself it's love, that sacrifice is noble, that compromise is maturity. But you know, if you're honest, that it's not conscious offering, it's quiet extinction, soft suicide. You think she doesn't notice. She notices. She always notices. Even if she can't name it, she feels when you disappear from yourself, when your presence begins to orbit hers, when your truth becomes negotiable, when you start adjusting to avoid friction. She grieves not for you, but for the man you used to be. The man who met her as mystery, who made her feel uncertain, alive, feminine, unstable in the best way. Now you are reliable, predictable, safe. Yet you sense the emptiness growing in her eyes, the touch that no longer lingers, the laughter that feels like performance. Still you don't understand. You say, but I've done everything right. Exactly. You've done everything right. And in doing so, you've become wrong in the one way that matters. You've ceased to be yourself. You've become a ghost of your former power. She didn't fall in love with your obedience. She fell in love with your distance, your lack of need, the untamed core you carried before you decided love meant taming yourself. The older man, if he's honest, finally admits something painful. He doesn't know who he is when she isn't looking. He spent so many years being provider, protector, dependable partner that he's forgotten the boy who used to stare at stars with fire in his chest. The boy who didn't need permission to speak, leave, or be. That boy was closer to truth than the man who replaced him. But this isn't cause for despair. This is the doorway. Unlike the myths you've been fed, manhood doesn't shrink with age. It sharpens, clarifies, burns cleaner, if and only if you stop lying to yourself. The lie is simple, that her love is the prize. It's not. The prize is the man who remains whole in love's presence, who doesn't fracture into versions, who doesn't trade identity for intimacy, who can love her fully without letting her define him. Once she senses you're no longer defined by her, she can finally relax into being with you. This defies everything you've been told. You were taught to serve, please, pursue. But Sartre saw through it all. He saw that to live authentically, you must remain a source of your own meaning. You are condemned to be free, not cursed, but required to choose yourself every day, regardless of who walks in or out of your life. If she walks out, let her. If you are truly the rare man, the one who doesn't collapse into her absence, then you were never abandoned. You simply return to yourself. She may come back or not, but you will remain. That is the only way forward. You have never been more attractive than in the moment you no longer needed to be. That's the paradox. Yet almost no man believes it because belief requires experience, and most men never give themselves the chance. They don't endure silence long enough, don't suffer solitude to its end. They jump ship too early, crawl back, apologize for their truth, break under pressure of her disapproval. But the man who stays standing, who stays silent when her rage demands explanation, who stays calm when she withdraws affection, expecting him to beg, who stays rooted when she tests his resolve, not because he's playing games, but because he refuses to lie to himself, that man becomes unforgettable, because he has become real. Sartre spoke of authentic existence, a life where a man accepts the weight of his freedom, the burden of his choice, and never pretends to be less than what he is. This is masculinity's essence, not as performance, but as presence. That presence, when not dependent on outcome, changes everything. She feels it. She may not even like it because it confronts her with her own freedom, her own capacity to choose, the unsettling awareness that this man will not collapse to make her feel secure, that he will not abandon his direction to follow her emotions. That's when her desire returns, not because he chased, but because she remembers what it feels like to be with a man who doesn't orbit anything. There's no age limit to this. It's not too late. You could be 70 and still remember who you were before you gave yourself away. You could be in your 20s and choose now to never hand over your identity again. It begins not with loud declarations, but with small refusals. The refusal to send that last message begging for clarity. The refusal to break your silence because it feels unbearable. The refusal to pretend you're okay with something that drains you just to keep peace. You are not here to be liked or selected. You are here to become, to expand, to exist with such force that even in stillness the world leans in. That is the legacy of the Sartrean man, the one who refuses to lie to himself for acceptance, who knows that every time he sacrifices authenticity for approval, he loses more than a moment. He loses a piece of his soul. The soul is not something you should gamble for love, not ever. If she truly respects you, if she's truly ready for a man, she will not leave when you reclaim your freedom. She will meet you there not as prize for your performance, but as a woman sovereign in her own being, choosing you, not because you need her, but because you don't. If she cannot, then she was never yours. She was your mirror, reflecting your own abandonment. So step out of the mirror, shatter it if you must, and walk forward alone, not in loneliness, but in power. Because only in that silence, that sacred solitude, will you meet the man you were always meant to be. And he is the one she cannot leave. You were never incomplete. That poisonous myth was fed to you from the first moment you saw her and thought, she is what I'm missing. But Sartre would tell you no one completes you, because to be complete is to stop becoming. The moment you hand someone that role, you surrender authorship, and a man without authorship is no man at all. When a man is willing to be alone, he becomes irresistible. Because aloneness is authenticity's birthplace. Not loneliness or exile, but chosen solitude, the kind that hammers you into something no one else could forge, that burns the noise out of you until your silence is its own music, that makes you enough in your own eyes. When that man speaks, he doesn't speak to impress. When he gives, he doesn't give to bind. When he stays freely. When he leaves, he doesn't look back. That man, that presence alters the room, not through tricks or status, but because he walks with the weight of someone who belongs to himself. She cannot help but feel it. Not every woman will be ready. Most are used to men who fold, calibrated to emotional acrobatics and strategic compliance. They won't understand what it means to be near a man who simply refuses to be less than real. But some women, the right women, will recognize you not with their mind, but with their nervous system. They will feel safe not because you coddle them, but because they finally sense they're in the presence of someone who won't vanish into their expectations, and that is rare. Let her come to you not as reward, but as test. Can you remain whole even in love's presence? Can you hold your course even when she cries, pleads, tempts, storms? Can you stay in yourself, not from cruelty, but because you no longer wish to lie? If you can, you will find freedom that no romance validation or praise can match. You will have yourself, and in that self you will find more than power, you will find peace. Something has shifted. Maybe it's quiet, maybe roaring, but you feel it. That deep inner silence no longer feels like loneliness, it feels like home. You are no longer reaching, no longer stretching yourself thin to be seen, no longer performing love like an audition. Now you watch the world revolve around a self, you no longer compromise. This is Sartre's secret, hidden between the pages of being and nothingness. You are nothing. And from that nothing you are everything you choose. No script, no savior, no role. Freedom is terrifying. That's why most men run from it, into women, work, wine, war, anything to avoid the raw, unbearable truth of their own authorship. But you have chosen otherwise. You have chosen to carry the weight, to be the source, to create meaning rather than borrow it. This choice, this radical act of being, changes everything. It doesn't mean you don't love or feel. It means you do not collapse. You can be touched but not reshaped, moved but not removed from your center. You can offer love but only from overflow, never from emptiness. Now she feels it. Whether she's 25 or 62, radiant or wounded, confident or confused, she feels something ancient rise in your presence. A gravitational pull that doesn't beg. A sovereignty that doesn't shift. Maybe she stays, maybe she doesn't. But that's not the story anymore, because you no longer build your story around who stays. You are the story. She can read it or walk away, but you are not rewritten. This is your arrival not at power or dominance, but at the holy stillness of a man who finally remembers what he is. He is not a mirror, mask, strategy, plea, or softened version waiting for permission. He is. Now the world must decide what to do with that, because you will not beg, kneel, or trade your soul for a touch text or temporary high. You will walk forward without needing a witness, and that is the man they remember. That is the man she dreams about years later, when her bed is warm but her spirit is cold. That is the man who no longer asks what went wrong, because now he knows nothing went wrong. He simply hadn't arrived in himself yet. But now you have. And from this place, everything begins. Not with a chase or strategy, but with silence. Still, unbreakable, free. This was Sartre's shocking truth. Women fall for rare men who don't need them, because in a world of desperate attachment, sovereignty is magnetic. In an age of emotional dependence, freedom is irresistible. And in the presence of a man who belongs completely to himself, even the most guarded woman remembers what it means to choose rather than settle, to desire rather than manage, to love rather than control. The revolution begins within, and it begins now.